I would like now to introduce the chair of the Ohio Mathematics and Science Coalition, Greg Foley. Greg?
Thank you, Nancy. Nancy has been instrumental in organizing this event, which is co-sponsored by AMATIC, and Pat Riley, the AMATIC webinar coordinator, has been very helpful as well. So please remember to put your comments in chat. Kim Yoke, who is our Q&A monitor, will be monitoring the chat and also the Q&A feature. I wish to acknowledge the Public Advocacy Committee of the Ohio Mathematics and Science Coalition, which is chaired by Peggy Costin and John Conklin. And you see the other members there. They were the ones who came up with this idea and organized this. So they're working behind the scenes, but we thank you very much for your work. Now it is my great pleasure to introduce two wonderful human beings. Dr. Ranthony A.C. Edmonds is the Arnold Ross Professor, Assistant Professor in the Department of Mathematics at The Ohio State University. Her research interests include commutative ring theory and topological data analysis in the context of redistricting. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics and a Bachelor of Arts in English from the University of Kentucky, 2 master's degrees, a Master of Science in Mathematical Sciences from Eastern Kentucky University, and a Master of Science in Mathematics from the University of Iowa, as well as a PhD in Mathematics from the University of Iowa. Dr. Edmonds is the principal investigator of a project entitled Hidden Figures Revealed: Dynamic History and Narratives of Black Mathematicians at The Ohio State University. She has developed a course at Ohio State entitled Intersections of Mathematics and Society, Hidden Figures. Our other presenter is Dr. Francis Su. He is the Benedictus Carwa Professor of Mathematics at Harvey Mudd College in Claremont, California. Dr. Su is a past president of the Mathematical Association of America, and his research interests include geometric combinatorics and applications in the social sciences. Dr. Su has a passion for teaching and for popularizing mathematics through writing and public engagement. Dr. Su's work has been featured in Quantum Magazine, Wired, and the New York Times. He received the 2013 HIMO Award, a national prize for collegiate mathematics teaching, and the 2018 Halmosh Ford Award for mathematical writing. His book, Mathematics for Human Flourishing, winner of the 2021 Euler Book Prize, is an inclusive vision for what mathematics should be. Now we're going to turn it over to Ranthony and Francis to have a conversation with us.
Hi, I think everyone can hear me. I'm unmuted. Great.
How's it going?
Good, good. So thank you so much for that introduction. And thank you to the organizers, and thank you all for attending and joining tonight. Though I think Francis, it's not night where you are.
No, it's afternoon, and of course I'm sitting on the beach right now as we speak.
Okay. So what we really want to do here is just to have a conversation about mathematics, and we want this conversation to be as interactive as possible. And so because of this, we'll have questions that we'll drop into the chat periodically. I think we had a question we wanted to start. Yes, okay, there it is. Just to kind of facilitate conversation. Let's see if we get some responses to this first question.
Yeah, what are some words that come to mind when you think of
joy, patterns,
possibility? Oh, I like that.
love, Patterns in geometry.
Creative and
Excitement.
connect.
Fun and beautiful. Satisfaction.
Those are some nice answers, Anthony.
Yeah.
Truth. Flexibility. Oh, that's an interesting one.
Brain growth. I like intersectional. So we've got a really engaged audience and a lot of really different things that are coming to mind when we just say mathematics. So for us specifically tonight or this evening, depending on where you are, we really want to focus our conversation around three particular themes: humanity, community, and justice as it relates to mathematics. Before we open the floor for a larger group conversation through a question and answer period. So we want to talk about humanity first, and this is something that I'm really excited about because I want to start by asking you about your book, Francis. One thing I really appreciated about your book is that you really work to position mathematics as being grounded in what it means to be human and living a more full human life. And this is a very powerful and humanistic idea. And so I hope you could take some time to just describe for the audience, what do you mean by mathematics for human flourishing?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I guess one of the things that I often ask myself when I do anything that I enjoy, like, gardening, is what draws me to that? What draws me to that passion? Like, Ranthony, for you, what are some of your hobbies?
I love plants. Someone commented on my bike. I like cycling and I'm really into fitness.
Yeah. So like, why is it that you are so excited or passionate about biking? Like, what draws you to that?
I love how it feels to ride. It's a very freeing feeling. And similar when it comes to plants, I love watching the growth and kind of tending to them and starting something from seeds. And so there's a joy there.
Yeah. Yeah. So then, part of the question I ask myself often is like, how do I tap into the deep human desires that all of us have? For instance, the freedom that you experience in biking, or maybe the beauty that we see in this picture that is a picture from my book, actually, of a figure reflecting on a mathematical pattern. What draws us in to these passions are deep human desires, and how do we make those part of our mathematical experiences? That's basically the question that I try to explore. So, Ranthony, would you like to see a card trick?
Sure.
Okay, great. Well, I have a deck of cards here, and as everybody can see, this deck is, there's, it's mixed. There's nothing funny about it. Haha. But just to be sure, I'm going to ask Ranthony to shuffle the deck. Okay, so Ranthony, can you do a riffle shuffle?
I can try.
Okay, good. Well, I'm going to hand you the deck. Okay, so I'm going to hand you the deck here, and I'm going to pass it over to you.
This is a pseudo deck. Here we go.
Okay, great.
Okay, and you said a ripple shuffle?
Yeah, just give it a single riffle shuffle. Ah, beautiful, wonderful, great. And no, don't worry, it doesn't have to be perfect.
Okay, and I hand them back to you.
Good. Can you hand it back? Thank you very much. Okay, great. So do you see that Anthony just gave this a nice little riffle shuffle? Okay. And as soon as I push the pieces together, it's in some order that's like, I have no idea what order it's in, right? She's the one who actually shuffled the deck. Okay. And if this were live, of course, she really would have shuffled this deck. I really would have no idea what order this deck was in. And it wouldn't have been perfect, right? Because we're all lopsided shufflers, and that's part of what makes this deck random. Yes. Okay, good. So Ranthony, would you believe I was born with an amazing ability?
Okay, what is this?
It's just one ability I have, one amazing. Everything else is like not amazing at all. I actually can feel the colors of the cards with my hands, and I can pull them out, actually, one red, one black. One red, one black. Yes. Oh yeah. You can see that. And in fact, I'll do it again. One red, one black. These are just behind my hands. There's no funny business.
So you're just pulling them off the deck. Are you? Yeah, I'm curious. I'm kind of like, are you doing some sort of self shuffle and pulling them, or are you just one in front of the other? Oh wow.
You don't believe I was born with this special ability?
I feel like there's something happening here. I don't know what though.
What is happening? I invite everyone here to speculate. How is it that you don't believe I have the ability to feel the colors of the cards? What's actually going on here? Invite you in the chat if you've never seen this trick. If you've seen this trick, don't give the fun away. Just to speculate what's happening.
You're still doing it.
I know. And of course, we're not going to reveal exactly what happens until the end, maybe the Q&A session, when we'll put a link in the chat.
Okay.
But we're seeing lots of people generate ideas here, probability, multiple decks. No, nothing special here. I'm actually, if you were live, you would see I only had one deck and I'm not bringing another deck out. In fact, this is a mathematical card trick. There's something mathematical about it that makes it very easy to do, because I can't really do sleight of hand.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is actually maybe a good segue. It's kind of like that piece of art that everyone sits and reflects. Like this card trick somehow draws us all in, because why is a card trick captivating for us? Go ahead and type that in the chat also if you want to lend some your voice here. What makes a card trick captivating? Mystery, magical.
We want to know the answer. Crazy solution. We're hearing this kind of resounding theme of mystery.
Yeah.
I think a good question is, is this notion of thinking and this mystery, is this something that we see in our classrooms when we're doing and teaching mathematics?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly wasn't in part of my experience that often, right? Often it was kind of like, okay, here are some things you have to learn, and here are some things you better memorize, for tomorrow's test, right?
Yeah, I think, I mentioned this to you earlier, that one kind of quote that I've heard that's really stuck with me is that learning mathematics is like learning grammar for years, but never getting to read a novel. And so it's this very formulaic sort of maybe potentially anxiety inducing endeavor. And it's not really, you don't think about it as being tied to being human.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, we've sort of stripped away from our experiences in teaching teaching mathematics. We sometimes stripped away what makes it the most enjoyable. Yeah, and of course, I think you and I are both not saying that there aren't skills to learn, right? We're not.
Of course.
I mean, we do have to learn our times tables, because that actually enables us to function well when we learn deep concepts. That's certainly the case. But I think what you and I are both interested in is bringing back some of the humanizing parts of mathematics to the classroom.
Yeah, I think, we're both professional mathematicians, but I imagine our audience is full of individuals, maybe some who are professional educators, maybe some who are just interested, or maybe some who don't consider themselves as math people. I'll put that in quotations. And so, this example that you've shown with this card trick, we're talking about mystery and kind of motivation, and it's getting at this notion of desire. And it's something you talk a lot about in your book. It's kind of math kind of getting at human desires. And I wondered if you could kind of illuminate that idea just a bit.
Yeah. I mean, if I have a desire for freedom, well, mathematics actually gives us some experience with freedom to choose different strategies. Like if you know lots of different ways to solve a problem, one of the things that I think is really neat is there's so many different ways to answer a mathematical question. And when you see multiple different ways, we're like, whoa, like you can choose the easiest one, or maybe each one illuminates a different idea, a different aspect of what's going on. If we're attracted to beauty, there's some beautiful ideas that make us go, wow. And I'm sure you've seen some of that in your own research, yes?
Yes, and I think one thing that's really interesting is how often, people who consider themselves as mathematicians, once again, talk about beauty versus kind of maybe others who say that this is something that was not a pleasant experience. And I think maybe the misconception is that those who are professional mathematicians have only had pleasant experiences, and this is why they are mathematicians. And so one thing I really appreciated about your book is that you do take time to be vulnerable and discuss some of the discouraging times you've had pursuing mathematics.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly the case. I was fortunate. I had, parents who encouraged me in my study of math, but so it wasn't for a little while until I got to graduate school in math that I encountered some resistance. I had difficulties. It was hard. It was there were lots of there's stuff going on in my life that made things difficult to focus on. And then I wasn't doing well at all in grad school, and a professor basically said, I don't think you're cut out to do mathematics. That was
Oh gosh, was it like to your face and like it just kind of hit you in your soul there?
Oh my gosh, no, yeah. So this was like, somebody who everybody sort of regards as a prominent mathematician who, of course I didn't know better. Like maybe he's right. Like maybe I would never be successful as a mathematician. So, at the time now I can brush it off, but at the time it was really hurtful. And, part of this made me reflect like, gosh, how many people do we intentionally or unintentionally discouraged from doing math just because we've made pronouncements based on limited information about what they can and can't do? How do we really know what people can and can't do?
Yeah, I can really relate to this story. I went to a creative and performing arts middle school, and so it was a very kind of not a very strict in the sense of what we had to do in class, but it was just very creative. And I was a writing major there. And then I transitioned to a STEM magnet program. And I remember, my middle school, we sang songs about our TI-82, and our teacher would kind of tell us, one thing that was really exciting was this proof. Is she proved that the 0.999 repeating was the same as 1. And she questioned us, can you find a number in between these two? And I remember being really young. I was, oh, I can't, but no, maybe, and just kind of really being stumped. But I found that process of thinking about it so encouraging. And so if I flash forward to my high school, I remember being assigned a problem at the end of a course with maybe a couple minutes left, and getting an answer immediately and being told by the instructor, oh, there's no way you could have solved it that fast. Keep trying it. It must be wrong. And then come to find out that I was actually correct the next day. And so this notion of, being told in not so many words, I don't believe in you, was really crushing, and it damaged my mathematical confidence until I kind of gave it another try in college.
Wow. Well, it's certainly great that you gave it another try, but that what you mentioned kind of it strikes me that an alternate, a better reaction from the teacher would have been, Ranthony, would love to see how you got that answer. That's really amazing. That's really neat.
Yeah.
Somehow, this is maybe brings us to thinking a little bit about the support that we either do or don't receive, and how we can maybe encourage support people better in their mathematical experiences. So should we transition to the next portion?
Yeah, I think so. We can kind of transition to talking about math and community, because at its core is this kind of need for belonging, and that's a really human element of what it means to kind of do mathematics.
Can you tell us a little bit about this picture that is before us?
Yes. So it's kind of mentioned in the introductions. I've worked a lot with the Hidden Figures story. And so this is the story of 3 African-American women, and that are featured in the film. There's 4 in the book, that have that were human computers, and they had a dynamic impact on our early space program at NASA, computing orbital trajectories for John Glenn's pioneering flight. And so I think this is a story that really resonated with a lot of people, because it was like, I didn't know that there were women who were doing these things and that made such a contribution to our early space program. And this picture here is something that was featured in a memorial piece by Katherine Johnson that was sent to me by Christine Darden. And so Christine Darden is the 4th hidden figure in the book, and she's still living, and is a wonderful person in her own right. But I felt like this picture really highlighted, the essence of Katherine Johnson as she was seen by her friends and colleagues. And that was someone who was deeply devoted to creating communities and to service. And so this is a picture of Katherine Johnson, during the time that she was working at NASA and Langley Research Center, and she's at her church and is tutoring kids in a basement. And something that she would do quite often is go around to local schools and kind of highlight the opportunities at Langley Research Center, try to encourage women in particular to go into STEM. And so it's, you have this story of these women, but you can't really understand the nuances of that story without talking about community. And so I really love that photo for this reason. And it also humanizes, Katherine Johnson.
So when we're talking about mathematical community, we're not just talking about community that happens within people who are in the classroom or within, although we want that to be part of people's experience, but you're saying we should think a little bit about what it means to reach out to the community.
Yes, yes. I think the thing that's really special is that, within Langley Research Center, you have kind of different divisions that are kind of working towards a common goal and forming research communities scientifically. But then you have these women who are a part of, technical organizations. They were a part of their local churches. They were all a part of the same sorority, Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. And so they were deeply devoted to this notion of community and doing mathematics in different spaces and exposing people to math. And so I think that it's also something that should be included in the conversation.
I was pretty inspired by this course that you've developed at Ohio State, I guess it's the Ohio State.
Yeah, you have to say the in Columbus. I learned that quickly.
But yeah, so I wonder, can you say a little bit about what you do in the classroom? How does this idea of community play out in the classroom? How do you cultivate that or encourage that?
Yeah, so we kind of think about it in two pieces. So first we talk about, mathematical communities, and we really explore what was happening, during this early period in NASA. So it was predated by NACA, which is the National National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics. And so we talk about primarily what these mathematical communities were doing, which was by focusing on mathematical tools. So one really neat thing that we do is, at that time, a computer was a person. It wasn't, what we think of it today. And they use tools that we no longer, kind of have access to. So we teach our students how to use slide rules, which is kind of a device that predated modern kind of handheld electronic calculators. But we talk about diversity and inclusion in math communities. We have them reflect on what sort of communities have they been involved in, what student organizations, and we reflect on the communities that the women in the book were involved in that helped them, on their personal and professional journeys. But we also do service learning, and that's, a different piece of the puzzle, but it's also, once again, has a large focus on community.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, but when you talk about the slide rule, it I think highlights in an interesting way how culture impacts the mathematics, the process of doing mathematics, and in what's chosen to go on the slide rule, and of course there's going to be all the basic arithmetic, but there's like all these different scales.
Yeah, it's a wonderful physical manipulative. So, I mean, it uses a logarithmic scale. So, right, when you're kind of adding the distances on this slide rule, you're doing multiplication. And so it's a really great physical manipulative just for teaching, and especially teaching logarithms. But so this is kind of.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I have one. So not to geek out too hard, but I always have mine with me, although I have no idea where my calculator is. And you can kind of see it uses sort of a logarithmic scale. This one is a post 1460 Versalog slide rule. So 23 scales, engineering grades. So we're not messing around here. But it's just fun.
It's kind of amazing to think we could put people on the moon with stuff that seems to go backwards today almost. Yeah. So can you say a little bit more also about like the service learning aspect? Like what's a takeaway for those of us who are teachers or maybe even parents about service learning?
Yeah, so we talk about, mathematical tools, right, and communities, but we want that those ideas to kind of be put into practice. So what we've done is we pair our students with local hidden figures, right? So these are leaders in the Columbus metro area who are using, quantitative skills and quantitative trainings, whether it's via a math background in undergrad, in their actual work. And so our students interview them and talk about what sort of mathematical tools do you use in your work? What sort of communities have been helpful in kind of helping you to get where you go? And so where the service learning comes in is, for those who may be unaware, service learning is this process of kind of designing intentional course activities, right, which is service learning activities, and then that meet some need of a community partner, and then having students reflect on how the service learning activities that they're performing not only help the community partner, but also help meet, course objectives. So for us in particular, we have our students, we have a partnership with the Center of Science and Industry here in Columbus. They have an initiative called The Color of Science, where they're working to highlight, people in Ohio that are underrepresented that have done great things in STEM. And so our students in their interviews with their local hidden figures are in turn kind of creating materials for this Color of Science initiative at COSI to use for educational materials through K through 12. So it's like this notion of kind of we have community in our class, but then we go out into the communities and kind of expose people to different ideas and careers in mathematics. And I think that's the key point to take away.
Yeah, that's great. And it also sort of highlights how in your classroom, you're not just teaching mathematical content, but you're teaching the importance of students having responsibilities to each other and to the community.
Yeah, and I think that that's the key takeaway is, I mean, I'd be happy to talk with anyone about service learning and how to kind of do a component in their course. But the main takeaway is if we really think that math is about community and about humanity, is this showing up in our actual teaching? And so this is one way that I've worked to kind of put this into my teaching. But I'm curious, what other ideas you have for kind of creating communities both within our classrooms and then just kind of out in the world. Can we create communities without being inside of a classroom setting?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first place that this happens, it starts in the home, right? So if any of us have kids, we know that like it's always always doing stuff with kids. And so then one of the questions is, how can you bring out the mathematical thinking that's already present in the things that you're already doing? Like if you're baking a cake and you're adding fractions, how can you already build that in? You ask your kid like, okay, how much now do I need if I'm going to make 2 cakes instead of 1 cake? You're already doing proportional reasoning. Or if you're playing a game together, you're doing logical thinking and helping all of us see the ways we're already doing mathematical thinking. I think is a big step towards helping people see themselves as mathematical thinkers.
So one thing that you mentioned in your book that I really just wanted to quickly note is that you said something really powerful, that kind of everyone is a teacher of mathematics in their own way. And I wonder if you could kind of talk to the importance of the attitudes that we communicate about mathematics and how that helps facilitate communities, even for maybe parents who don't consider themselves, mathematicians.
Yeah, I mean, one of the fears, I think, so one of the things that research it shows is that parents who have math anxiety pass that on to their kids. And, you can kind of see how that might happen, right? Like, first of all, it shows up in just the fear that we all have, like, oh no, what if my kid asks me a question I can't answer? And, as a math professor, I get questions all the time that I can't answer.
Yeah, all the time.
That to you?
Yeah, it's just like, well, we can think through this together, right? I think it's that willingness to push through that's really demonstrative of it's okay to not know, but where do we go from here?
Yes, and modeling what a thinker does rather than what a thinker knows, right? Like, we can't know everything, but we can all come up with strategies to think about how we'd solve this or that. Yeah, so I think what you're pointing out there is really an essential piece of encouraging mathematical communities. Hey, we're all learning together. And we're all thinking through this together. And I love it when a student asks me a question I don't know. I just say, well, let's think through this. Or if you figure something else out, come back and report to us. I'd love to hear what happens.
Yeah. So I think, I'm going to drop a kind of question in the chat before we transition to our next idea, which is just, what are ways that you can work to build community in your own spaces? I think we kind of highlighted some ideas of how we've done that for ourselves, but I think it's something that we really encourage everyone to reflect on.
Yeah.
And I think, especially in the wake of kind of everything that's been happening, there's a need to kind of think about community in mathematics and making sure that it's inclusive. And this kind of ties into our third theme, which is justice. And I think that this is kind of something interesting because we don't always think about math as being tied into justice, right? But yeah, and so this is a quote. Oh, okay. I couldn't see the screen for a second. So this is a quote from your book that just was really, really poignant. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about, how to frame this quote in the context of thinking about justice in mathematics.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know there's a lot of people who care a lot about some of the inequities that happen in mathematical spaces or mathematical professions. And one thing that I really like about this quote by Simone Weil, who is a French philosopher, one thing to know about her is that her older brother was a famous mathematician, and she was always comparing herself to her brother. And the reason I like the quote is that, she's talking here about the yearning that all of us have to be seen differently, right? Like maybe someone makes assumptions about us or our abilities or who we are by the color of our skin or by our gender, or maybe because we came from some small town and therefore maybe, don't have whatever opportunities that the big city offers, and people get looked down upon in some ways. And what I love about this quote is it sort of highlights that we all have this desire to be seen differently, to be read differently. And maybe that's a different framing. I mean, it's more of like a call to correct inequities, is really a call to see the dignity in every human being.
I think that's, and it's an interesting take, because I think, one thing that I know I've experienced is when we're trying to kind of make our classrooms more just, kind of freezing a bit and thinking about, well, where do I start? What does it mean for math to be more just, and how do I do it? And how do, and then personally, I want to be read differently. So how do I make sure that I don't read my students, in a way that's influenced by my own biases?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it involves self-reflection. I mean, I certainly have grown in my own teaching constantly, because I'm constantly being challenged to think about how I can include students who, for whatever reason, are not participating. And it's easy to write those students off. It's easy to say, okay, I'm just going to focus on the A students, the ones who already are performing. But what credit is that to us as a teacher if we only focus on the A students?
Yeah, I think it's something you get at in your book. You talk about this experience of going to a Chinese restaurant and then going and kind of not being offered an authentic Chinese menu, and you kind of make this parallel of who gets offered the secret menu in mathematics. And I really enjoyed that story, by the way. Very illuminating.
It was actually a way of kind of also turning the tables a little bit on my audience, because you all see me as Chinese, but when I walk into a Chinese restaurant, I'm seen as like completely not Chinese because I can't speak a word of Chinese. And so what happens is I'll ask for the secret menu, which is the menu that has all the good stuff, and they only give Chinese people. I'd be like, hey, can I have that menu? And they'll be like, no, you don't want that menu. And it kind of reminds me of all the times that I've maybe said to somebody, no, you shouldn't take another math class because I don't think they're cut out for math. And now, of course, when I think about in this term, I'm like, in this framing, I'm like, why did I do that? Why did I feel the need to prejudge whether somebody's going to go on in math or not?
I think, I really related to this this notion of kind of justice and wanting to be read differently. And it's something that I've even experienced, for my students. So the last time we taught the Hidden Figures course, there was a student who talked about how their advisor told them that they shouldn't be a part of mathematics. And they kind of wore this as a chip on their shoulder, kind of like every effort was trying to prove, someone wrong. And I think, when I think about what does it mean for mathematics to be just, it means that it's inclusive. And that we are intentionally working towards efforts to increase who gets to participate fully in mathematics. And that fullness is really, it's challenging, but I think it's something that it's not something we need to talk about. We just have to do it. And I think it's tricky thinking about where to start, right? But this is what I think of it. Yeah. What were you saying?
I was going to say, one thing that comes to mind here is that, like, we often think like, by trying to be inclusive of everybody, if you have kind of the zero-sum mindset, then that feels problematic. Like, if we're going to include more people, well, maybe, it's going to be harder for me to get a good job, or, whatever it is. Like, if you think about math as like only for getting a good job, then of course you're going to have this zero-sum mindset. But if you think about math as human flourishing, as a way for people to live life well. That's
Mhm.
something that everybody ought to and should have the ability to experience, and it's not zero sum. So we ought to be working for the flourishing of all.
So one, thinking about everyone having the ability to do math and to live life well, I wanted to talk about a relationship from your book. Each chapter ends with a sort of correspondence with a friend that you've made named Christopher Jackson. And for those who've not read the book, Christopher Jackson is currently, and at the time of the book publishing, incarcerated. And you kind of have this beautiful dialogue throughout the book that shows a progression of your correspondence as he learns and grows as a mathematician. And I wondered if you could talk a bit more about your relationship with Christopher.
Yeah. So first thing that I want people to know is that Christopher has changed me more than I've changed him. Right. This isn't a story about how I taught Chris math. It's actually a story about how Chris has helped me see my profession in a fuller way. Like, I think before I met Chris, I intellectually had this idea. Yeah, everybody has something to gain from thinking mathematically. And now it's like, whoa, like even people that it's so easy for society to write off. We can't go through life writing people off like that, because I mean, look at him, look at the way he's flourishing, even in prison. He's freed himself in his ability to reason and think, even though his body is imprisoned.
I think that's a really just powerful notion of kind of who gets to do mathematics and who does mathematics benefit. And I think I really appreciated kind of him saying that he's learned to think creatively through mathematics and compares it to chess a lot and just reasoning. And I think that it's really a great framing for math is something that is a human endeavor, right? And it is grounded in our need for justice, but we need community to really do it the right way. I think we maybe can pause here and shift a bit because we don't want to kind of be comprehensive. We just want to kind of to start the conversation about these ideas and then open it up for a group chat and talk. So is that okay with you, Francis? Is there anything?
I think it's a great idea. I think as you're maybe if you want to put in the chat the question that we thought people
Okay.
chew on.
Yes, I realized that the first time I had it set to only panelists, unfortunately. So
Okay.
so this time I'm setting it to everyone. So hopefully everyone can see this. It was just a contemplation of the question related to our conversation on justice.
Yeah. And while people are typing in their answer, I just wanted to highlight a point that I think we sort of brought up implicitly. And that is the idea that, and maybe this is a takeaway I hope everyone will come away with, is math isn't just a set of skills, right? Like factoring a quadratic or knowing how to bisect an angle or whatever, right? But it's actually a set of virtues, like the ability to think, the ability to reason, the ability to be creative, the ability to be enchanted, right? Like the expectation, building in us the expectation of enchantment with, like, a card trick does that, but maybe math classrooms can be that way as well. And these virtues are the things that actually serve you well in life, right? Like Chris isn't, and we don't actually factor quadratics, hardly ever, right? But have we learned to think and to reason because of our math training? Yes. Is that what employers are looking for, even though we're not selling math as just for getting a good job? Yes, employers are looking for those kinds of skills, those kinds of virtues, not just skills. So I guess I'll put up this. Is this a good time for us to transition to our
Yeah, I think so.
Let me put up our Q&A slide, and we have I think about 15 minutes for discussion. So feel free to put in the Q&A, and I see Kim is here to help moderate.
Oh, and I just wanted to highlight that these are some of our local hidden figures that you see in this sort of grid here above my name.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you both so much, Ranthony and Francis. This is just a fascinating, wonderful conversation. I wish we could spend all evening with you both. But we have a lot of great questions in the chat or in the Q&A tool, I should say. And what I've tried to do is to kind of look at themes. We have some common themes. And so I'm going to start by asking a question that kind of, I'm going to sort of pose a couple of questions that are related, and I think you can sort of address them together. So we have a number of people that are asking about essentially about school mathematics. And for instance, one person asks, how does one help students realize that math isn't only or even mostly what's taught in math class or the math lesson? People also are asking about just the curriculum in general. What content do you think needs to be emphasized and or eliminated? Well, not and or eliminated? How do we balance being inclusive and allowing for creativity with legislated mandates of standards? I think, yeah, that kind of, and how do we include the flexibility and cultural value in mathematics rather than reinforcing kind of traditional perceptions?
Yeah, great. I'll take a first crack at one aspect of that question, which is how do we make it part of our mathematical learning? I think one very practical way is to make it part of your assessment of student learning. And so part of that means then not just giving students on a homework or exam just a bunch of problems to solve. You know, of course, you give them problems to solve, you're testing skills, but you know, you're also trying through that to assess various things like, are they able to be creative in problem solving? But the problems themselves don't communicate that. So one of the things that I like to do on my exams and homeworks is to give people reflection questions that force them to, first of all, they see that I value creative thinking. So I might ask a question like, in what ways did your wrestling with the problems on this homework set increase your imagination, right? And then, you know, they'll answer a question like that, but it shows them like I value imagination. It forces them to think a little bit how they use their imagination to solve a problem, and it's an easy way for them to get. You know, I don't grade those problems very harshly. I just basically give nearly full points for any thoughtful answer.
I think I'd echo that I've had success embedding reflection into my courses as well. I mentioned that having reflective components is a key part of service learning, but I also do this in my advanced mathematics classes right now. Because of COVID, I'm doing this using discussion boards on our learning management system. And having continuing conversations and dialogues between students allows the space to have conversations about, you know, issues of diversity and equity and inclusion. But if you are in a classroom environment where you've not made the space to kind of just talk about math in general, it's going to be very difficult to then insert, you know, dialogues and conversations about, you know, topics that aren't tricky, but that maybe it's difficult, I think, for some people to talk about these things. We're afraid to say the wrong things. And so one thing I think is just having a classroom environment where people are used to reflecting and thinking about the problems that they're working on and then talking to one another. And so we often have students kind of grab an article that interests them and share it that's related to what we're doing in class. And I learn new things this way all the time. It's like, oh, did you know that they were using derivatives to do this? And I did, you know, this. And so it's really, so I would just echo this notion of reflection as a tool to kind of start having these conversations.
Yeah, and one very maybe simple way to do this, if you feel like the curriculum and your time in class is packed, is to put a question on every homework assignment that's a very simple reflection question that causes maybe metacognition. Am I using that word right? That's people in education probably know this better than I do, but forces them to think a little, you know, be a step back from the actual computations that they're doing.
Yes. Well, thank you both. I think to follow up on that a little bit, what would you both recommend if you could sort of say something to policymakers at every level, education policymakers at every level, national, state, local, you know, in a school building? What kinds of things would you suggest as we think about mathematics education policies and practices on a systemic scale in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I mean, I'm a big fan of standards. I believe it's important to have standards, but I do think that, for instance, at the high school level, there may be too many, and it's packed in ways that I think if we could open up some of the standards and allow for play and creativity in the classroom, that would go a long way. I mean, it's you know, and of course the rationale I would say is, like, if you look at how people in mathematical careers are doing math in the professions, this is what they're doing, right? You want to put a spaceship on Mars. You are learning to collaborate with other people, talk about mathematical ideas. You're learning to think and to reason, to pull out strategies you've never used before. How do we make space in the classroom for that? And can that be part of, for instance, the mathematical practice standards? The practice standards do encourage some of that, but I would enlarge the practice standards maybe to include virtues and beauty and joy and wonder. And I would decrease some of well, certainly the number of standards, but maybe another way to do that is just to make them more coherent and make it clear which standards belong together so that you can teach them together.
I think one thing I'd add is, or maybe even echo, is this notion of, you know, we have these things that we're trying to do and having them not be separate, like they are an integrated part of what our standards are. And when we think about, you know, issues of diversity and inclusion in mathematics and increasing access, this is something that is, to see that it's prioritized means that we see it happening in our class all the time. It's not kind of an ad hoc, I'm going to have a lesson plan with a sprinkle of diversity, whatever that means to you in the context. But this is just a part of my curriculum. And so this involves, you know, getting together and thinking about how do I reframe, you know, the things that I'm teaching in a way that provides value and makes people be seen. And also, you know, we think about the card trick example. I think we haven't kind of revealed yet the math behind that, but, you know, once again, I think bringing more creativity and more just intrigue into and I guess mystery maybe into the math classroom helps to increase participation by just making it more interesting for the students and the teachers. I don't think anyone wants to teach boring mathematics, and I don't know that many people want to learn it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I fully agree. All right. Well, another theme in our questions had to do with the idea that many people have, as one participant said, post-mathematics trauma or math phobia. And one of the participants said, sometimes my students say they get confused or frustrated when there are multiple ways to solve a math problem. They seem to only want one way or the right way or single formula. How would you encourage them to apply their creativity and to, you know, in the process to kind of overcome that trauma or that phobia that they may have?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would maybe ask them to think about is, like, when is it the case that they, you know, like if they were stuck in a, I don't know, they fell into a well and they need to get out, like, it certainly would be really sad if there was only one way to get out of the well, right? Like, we always, in any unfamiliar situation, we always need multiple. It's great to have multiple ways to attack a problem. And so, you know, part of, I think, what I hope we can communicate to our students is, I'm teaching you to be able to solve problems you've never seen before, so that when you get into situations that are unfamiliar, you can actually innovate. Right? And innovation is exactly what's sort of happening behind this, right? Like, you know, so it's not just getting out of wells, but it's actually creating things that hopefully do some good for society. And we hopefully are able to think about ways in which they can be misused.
Ranthony, did you want to add anything to that?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Sure. Well, essentially the idea that we have a lot of students that have math trauma or math phobia for a variety of reasons in their background and their experience. And what can we do as teachers when students maybe only sort of want one way and they just sort of want, you know, tell me one way and I'll do that. And that's all I want to know. And I'm kind of afraid of anything else. So how might you address that as an educator?
I think, well, so one, just speaking to the trauma, I think one way to kind of to deal with that is to humanize it and to make it really clear that it's okay to struggle, and that this is kind of a side effect of doing good mathematics, of thinking, thoroughly through a problem. It's not a bad thing. This is a good thing. It means you're in the middle of something, you're on your way. And but I think, we have this negative attachment to, if I don't know right now, and you can kind of shut down. So once again, creating communities where it's common to, work through others before that process happens, before you shut down. You can kind of all work, but it's not easy. But I think, so in terms of talking about struggles and trauma, I just think being vulnerable as an instructor about the fact that this is okay, and that these are ideas that you also had to grapple with. It went a long way. I remember the first time I recognized or realized that people that I looked up to had failed things and had struggled, and it was just mind-blowing, because just hearing that just meant the world, because I just would have never thought that this person who I held in such high esteem could have ever had trouble with anything.
Yes, that makes so much sense. It's so true. The vulnerability is really critical. Well, I think we may have time for one or two more questions. So another question that several people have raised is the idea of service learning in the younger grades. So in elementary grades, do either one of you have thoughts, suggestions about that? And I'll just tie in one other question that was asked that I think is a little bit related, or at least in terms of taking math into a much broader space, the idea of mathematics in nature at any level. So service learning in elementary grades or mathematics in nature, either one of those.
So, I mean, there's different types of service learning. There's so at the college level, there's research-based service learning, which would be great for capstones. And so this also for senior projects and projects for maybe high school students, having a service learning project that relates to some sort of partnership with a local community or organization. But if you're thinking about young kids, direct service learning, all it really is kind of having students reflect on an idea that's part of your course outcomes or objectives, and then put that idea into practice by engaging with the community in some way. So, like coaching some sort of youth activity, or tutoring, or reading to the elderly, or this is a service, and it's as long as it's something that highlights what you're doing in the class, and can allow students to kind of integrate with a particular community, not integrate, excuse me, associate or relate to a particular community, and then reflect on that, then I think it has a chance to be really powerful. And so I'd love to see, what this would look like in mathematics in particular, because it would really drive home this idea of, okay, this is something that is relevant. Here are people, this is how it's showing up in society. I'm interacting with people who are beyond kind of my bubble of where I am in school, and seeing where this takes place, which can sometimes motivate students way more than we ever could, just by saying that these things exist. Hearing it elsewhere can be really powerful.
Yeah, I'll only add to that the one thing that's great about the service learning that Ranthony's pointing out is using mathematics to try to solve the problems that people actually care about. And even at the grade school level, they're simple, just getting students to ask the questions that lead to math questions, I think, are interesting. They're selling popsicles at the lunch stand, or at the whatever stand it is, right? How many popsicles do we need to have so we don't run out by the end of the week, right? That's a question that arises when you talk to people who have to decide how many popsicles to buy. So maybe it doesn't have to be like anything big. It could just be interviewing the cafeteria staff about like popsicles, and then forming a question. Just forming the question already is, I think, a big win.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much. I wish we could go on. I know at this point I need to turn it over back to Nancy Sattler, who is going to help us conclude the evening.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you, Anthony and Francis. This has been an awesome evening. I really appreciate all your comments, and I want to tell everybody that we will be sending you an email with a link to the recorded webinar, and also some resources that Ranthony and Francis think will be very interesting for you to have. So stay tuned for that. We'd also like you to take a poll right now, and we will be sending you a survey that we'd like you to complete. I'd like to let you know about our upcoming webinars. On June 10th, we will be giving some ideas on how you might apply what you've heard tonight into the classroom or at your home. And it will be led by OMSC Paul Post member and also other Ohio teachers. So the registration link will be available on the OMSC website beginning May 1st, and that webinar will be June 10th. We will also be having a webinar in September with Teddy Chow and Chris Orban, and we'll be posting information about that on our website as well.
Can you share your screen and show that information?
Sure, that would be very helpful, wouldn't it?
And Ranthony and I prepared a list of potential resources that we might send out afterwards, and we'll pass those along to, I guess, Nancy or Greg to
yes, I'll be glad to do that. So June 10th again, coming up, the information will be on the OMSC website. We'll have that information in the email to you as well.
And I still don't see the information on the screen. There we go.
Okay, technical difficulties. So we will be sending that information. I would like to thank all of our sponsors. Particularly, I'd like to thank Amatic for allowing us to use their webinar platform, and for Pat Wiley, who has been a tremendous help to all of us. For OCTM, Ohio-Matic, the Ohio section of the MAA, CCAL, OMILC, the OTEEA, and the Ohio PTA. Thank you very much, all of you, for sponsoring us. The Ohio Mathematics Science Coalition is very pleased to present this webinar this evening, and we're looking forward to having you attend some of our future webinars. Thanks again for attending, and watch for information in the future.
I was trying to answer just a couple of questions there's so many that popped up in the chat. I was looking through and trying to type responses.
Yeah, if you want to answer anything, and some people may still be online.
Yeah, we still have 130 people with us.
We could. I mean, we could chat for a little while longer if we want to try to answer some of these.
Yeah, there were so many great questions. I hated to eliminate any of them.
Yeah, maybe we could just take a couple and we don't both have to answer each one. It's just the ones we think we can address.
I think there were a couple, and I think Ranthony, I saw you maybe typing an answer to one, but encouraging underrepresented students in mathematics and justice and inclusion, both inside and outside the classroom. How do we do that through mathematics?
Yeah, I think the response that I typed was, something like a mathematician of the day. That's kind of a simple fix, and then that way you have a way to talk about a whole host of historical and contemporary mathematical figures from all different kinds of backgrounds. I think one thing I really try to stress is that, like, when things are kind of integrated as part of your normal course, it doesn't feel like you're kind of tagging on some sort of element for the sake of trying to be diverse. I think that's really good, but if it can just be part of your regular day-to-day, that's even better.
Yes, indeed. Let's see, I'm looking through. I know that a couple, you've answered a couple of them.
I was trying to answer some here as well. Someone asked about math history, and I think the only thing I'd say, math history is great for providing context, but most of the math we're aware of is math done by Europeans, and maybe not so much by other cultures. And so it's helpful if you can to highlight other contributions of many cultures in teaching history. as well as to highlight current people who are doing math, to balance out, so people can see themselves, their own culture in mathematics.
Someone who typed in the chat directly a question about tracking.
Yes, yes. I was just going to highlight that one in the. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, that's maybe. I mean, it's some ways that's a nuanced conversation, because I mean, I think tracking is really horrible in the sense that we're often tracking who we think are low ability students. I put that in quotes, into dead end course progressions where they basically have no hope of further progressing in mathematics, because they end up in these dead end progressions. And that's a little different than pathways or acceleration. And that requires a nuanced conversation. Like, you know, do you have an accelerated pathway for people who really need more challenge and stimulation? And maybe it's helpful that they're not like psyching out everyone else. So yeah, so I distinguish the two, and I'm definitely against tracking.
Okay, thanks, Francis.
One question, I mean, I think it's kind of, a lot of people can relate to this. It was by George Lippmann. It's kind of saying that, like, I'd like to focus on these things, but then my insert here won't give me the freedom, whether it's the curriculum or my dean, or I guess this notion of feeling restricted by what exists to be able to kind of implement something that's different and would be really helpful for students.
Yeah, such a hard challenge. I mean, I feel empathy, but I don't know if there's easy answers that apply to everyone. Somehow, I guess it'd be great having your district leader or superintendent or principal learn about some of the ways that math instruction is changing. Maybe even at the college level, like, you know, that thinking is valued more than actual, you know, facts.
Oh, because we talked about this. You mentioned that, like, a lot of kind of the things that we see are being tailored because they believe that once students get to college, this approach is going to be beneficial because they're not going to be engaging in active learning. But in fact, we see colleges are moving towards active learning and less lecture style and more interactive and experiential components. And so teaching this way in high school would be, you know, very beneficial.
And it's going to sound self-serving, but give your district leader, your principal, a copy of my book. I mean,
I support that.
The reason I say that is that, like, you know, you're not appealing to your own, here's what I think, here's what I've heard, but you could point to someone else who's saying, hey, you know, we really need to change the way we think about this teaching. It doesn't have to be my book. It could be, you know, Amanda Jansen's book on rough draft math, you know, like the fact that math is really a process of revision, and we shouldn't think of it as a one and done. Like, you know, you get an answer. It's not just right or wrong. You can take an answer that isn't quite right and revise it until it's, you know, it's more correct, right? So revision is a huge part of doing math. And again, that's a process of doing math rather than a result.
Right. Well, and I think kind of to piggyback on that, I think we have, along with your book and that book and so many other great resources and books that we have several national mathematics education organizations that have wonderful published statements and visions and recommendations. And I would certainly suggest that any district leader or, you know, at any level, really take a look at those with their staff and their school leaders. Mm-hmm.
NCTM, Catalyzing Change is a recent publication about changing the ways we think about math, but also trying to give some coherence to the standards, the high school standards. There's also Principles to Actions, which I think gives a really nice framework for thinking about many of these questions.
Indeed. I see that there's a question from April. Many Black, Indigenous, and people of color students, BIPOC students of mine, feel like distance learning is better for them because of the lack of physical stereotypes. I don't really have a question, but more of a concern with moving into hybrid soon and in-person learning in the fall. I don't know if either of you have a reaction in particular to that.
I was just talking about this to my husband the other day. I was like, I've gotten really bold. Like virtual me is much bolder. I was at a workshop recently on mathematical and computational approaches to social justice, which is really wonderful. This notion of kind of integrating these ideas that we've been discussing into actual research problems. But I found myself having conversations with people from Duke and Harvard. And I think if I had been in a normal conference and maybe looked at those name tags, I might have kind of shirked away, especially being more junior. And so I think that this is something that we'll really have to reflect on when it comes to online teaching. There are often times where I'm the only woman in a seminar room, the only Black person of color. And so I find myself, it's difficult to trust my voice, feeling like, okay, if I'm going to speak, if I'm going to say something, it's got to be the right thing. Versus online, I feel, I guess, a lot more. And it could just be that COVID's made me like, you know what, I don't have time to be worried about these things right now. But I think that there has been a lot of equity, even in who can participate. I've noticed that my students, they don't talk over each other as much. They're more collaborative in kind of our breakout groups and on our synchronous courses online. So I think we'll really have to focus on how do we maintain these pieces of equity that have kind of arisen, when we transition back into a physical setting, because that would be a really sad thing to lose.
But indeed. Thank you.
I also wonder if sometimes hiding behind a blank screen gives people an opportunity to be a little more vicious than they otherwise would. I haven't seen that in my classes, but for instance, I do know that this happens online on Twitter, when you're not really engaging with a person, you're engaging with with nameless faces, and sometimes people are much more to behave differently. So that's a real question for, I guess, all of us to think through, like what we gain and what we lose from online interactions.
Absolutely. Very relevant question today. I don't know if we are continuing. What's the
Yeah, I'm still typing. So there's like
Okay.
a Craig, he was asking, how do we help students realize that math isn't mostly what's taught in math class or the math lesson. And I think we've kind of touched on this a lot, but maybe showing them examples that illustrate that this, bringing in articles or even coming up with kind of creative problems that aren't just kind of formulaic and remote. What kind of skills are you having to use to solve these things? And I think, just in general, I just found it so cool. And I wasn't exposed to a lot of this until I got to the master's program, which is too late. Like, you shouldn't have to be, oh yeah, when I was working on my PhD, I learned that math was cool. But just seeing like these neat ideas from number theory that show up in life. So I learned about something called modular arithmetic, and this notion of kind of thinking about arithmetic based on kind of like some mod. So a mod is like, we think about the remainder of something based on, so okay, mod 12. We're going to kind of think about everything based on its remainder when we divide by 12. And this is what we're essentially doing when we think about a clock, right? Like, we don't say 13, we say like 1, because 13 has a remainder of 1 when we divide by 12. And so there's this way to kind of think about arithmetic in this neat way. And it turns out that like this is really related to this idea of what's called a check digit. And so whenever we kind of type in our credit card, and they say, oh, that's not, well, maybe the students don't have a credit card, but whenever we maybe scan a book and there's an error or input something into an online system, to see if there's a user error, they usually do some sort of algorithm related to modular arithmetic. And this concept you really only need to understand division at a certain level of multiplication. And so I thought that was so cool, but I didn't learn about it until I got to number theory, right? And so I think just kind of recognizing that math is all around us. Francis kind of waved his phone, but even then I kind of vaguely got a sense that, okay, math is important somehow, but being explicit whenever possible, even with elementary ideas, is a really great place to start.
Yes.
That's so true. I know that I hear this so often from so many people that it wasn't until their master's or doctoral level work in mathematics that they realized that mathematics was really about problem solving and reasoning. And they realized that so much of what they had done in a traditional school mathematics program in K-12 and undergrad even was very procedural and you know, not very based in thinking or creativity. And that's just so sad.
Yeah, if I could talk to so here's an idea for leaders, for you know, policymakers and that, I would say, like, give teachers more money for professional development. Like, give teachers money so that they can actually go, you know, take a class, a math class that's really fascinating and interesting, and learn some things that will really not just help their craft, but enable them to experience this joy and wonder. You don't have to wait till a master's program to do this.
Certainly not.
And
I wish
I
it
know
had
that
the actual seminar, but like, yeah, like.
in your book, you talk about inquiry-based learning, I know, and that's a way at the school level or at the collegiate level for students to engage in some interesting things, and where it's student generated instead of teacher generated.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've responded to the themes of just about all of the questions that are in the Q&A.
Yeah, I think I tried to answer one, but I accidentally pressed live and it went away. So I'm typing in the chat. It was about math and nature, and I was saying that one kind of idea would be looking at fractals,
Yes.
and kind of patterns, and even, you know, for young kids, just having them color, and oh, I colored a fractal today. What's a fractal? Let's see. Maybe.
They're beautiful. They're amazing.
Yeah, so really interesting. I'm really interested in kind of math history. And so there's the very first Black male to earn a PhD in mathematics from Ohio State was, his name was William McWhorter, and he specialized in fractal theory. And so there's a whole bunch of fractals just out there with his namesake called McWhorter fractals. And I just really love like looking at the different ones and kind of seeing and recognizing that this is like a very mathematical thing. Yeah, some of it wallpaper and coloring. Yeah, I just think it's really, really fascinating.
Yeah, amazing. Let's see. Yeah, I'm glancing at the chat now too.
Yeah, math and nature, math and music. I guess, you know, one thing that's great is just for students to explore a piece of music that they like and ask them to comment on its mathematical themes or structure. That I think could open up some interesting conversations.
Ooh.
And what can they do then to create their own music in that style? Like, what can they vary some of the structure in some interesting way? These are all great questions.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
I really want to highlight the importance of good questions. Like, questions, I like to say in my class, good questions are better than good answers, because they bring up, you know, interesting further things for exploration. And it would be great if students came away with, like, you know, learning how to ask a good question.
You know, recently I read, or well, I guess it was about a year ago, but I read the book More Beautiful Question. And Francis, that reminds me of really the theme of that entire book is really, you know, we have young children that ask questions all the time because they're curious and that's their nature and they want to know about the world around them. And then somehow over a not very long period of time in children's early years, we kind of end up, you know, kind of quashing that in a sense. And you know, and that's, again, a very kind of sad thing. And so how do we re-encourage that? How do we begin to encourage that more? And again, better questions. I love how you said that. Better questions are often much better than than answers. Yes. Yeah. Well, let's see.
One thing I really liked about the book was just seeing Christopher kind of learn to kind of, you see this process of him kind of asking more and different questions, and at the end kind of saying that, you know, math is a doorway to kind of explore creative things. And I thought that was just really unique, seeing his mathematical journey throughout the text.
Yeah, it really unfolds, like the early letters versus the later letters, that like the questions get deeper and broader. And yeah,
It was, and Christopher was the one who originally wrote to you, correct? Is that?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, his mother I think the way he tells it, his mother sort of looked up on our website. I don't know how she decided to choose, why she chose me as somebody to write, but then she suggested to Chris that he write me. He was looking for distance learning programs at multiple
Okay.
universities, but he, I think I was the only person that he wrote personally versus others. So
Hmm.
That was a great connection to make.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and I think in many ways, yeah, it's just wonderful to be part of that.
Yes.
I want to thank you guys for a great evening or afternoon, depending on where you are, or if you're in Australia.
It's in the morning, tomorrow morning in Australia.
Yes, but this has been fabulous, and I have not finished your book yet, but I do have it, and I just thank you both very much, and I thank OMSC for giving everybody this opportunity for listening to what you had to say, because we can make such a difference with our children, with our grandchildren, with our students. And you have given us a lot of food for thought. So thank you so much. And
Thank you.
thank you, Pat, for
Thank
sticking
you so
with.
much for organizing and inviting. Really appreciate the opportunity.
All right, yes.
We are so glad you've been here. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
joining us in Ohio. Francis and Ranthony, we're so glad you're here in Ohio.
We need to figure out how to keep you here in Ohio.
Yes.
So anyway, thank you, everyone. Thanks, Peggy, for you and your committee for getting the ball rolling on this.
Thank you.
Thanks to Amatic, and thank you especially Ranthony and Francis. Kim, great job with the Q&A. Thank you, everyone. And I hope that you come and join us for future webinars with the OMSC.
We're gonna have to